basically eating enough to survive. And they had their olives and stuff, but it was mainly grain, and it wasn't stuff to make you big. I mean, if you go to like a tropical island where there's fish everywhere, and you're eating your ass off and fish because there's fish everywhere, you can jump in and hunt down the fish. You're gonna get big. Eat protein all the time, and that's why Samoans are so damn big. Samoan goes to the gym for a year. A year later, he's built like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they're tall too. Samoans, like Queen Lokilani, who they made that Hollywood video movie that just came out. In real life, she was over 6 feet tall, and this is like 100 years ago. She's like way bigger than all the men who she went and hung out with when she went to England. And I saw a picture of a Samoan queen who was supposed to be 7 feet tall, and she was big, built like a fat lady. So yeah, those Samoans were big, giants. I think they even have like gravestones of like huge people, like 9 feet tall or something. People can be kind of like crocodiles. You just keep growing and growing and growing until you stop eating them, and then you stop growing. And that's why the Dutch are so big, because they're eating well. So, anyways, yeah, I think racially it's basically the same then as now. Until you put in the genocides and the migrations, but we have that recorded. So we can plug it in, and then you make the adjustments, and then, so you basically know what people look like in the past. And I'll talk about those migrations and genocides later, because we haven't gotten to them yet. But yeah. So, anyways, the Greeks, yeah, those Spartans were bastards. How much juicy juice? Okay, I have juicy juice. Okay, goody good. So, anyways, the Greeks, those Spartans were bastards, but they ended up getting their asses kicked by other guys, and so the Greek city-states taking turns taking over. So, come the year 340-ish, you have a king called King Philip of Macedon, not present-day Macedon. This is about the Macedonians from Greek era are more or less modern-day Thessaloniki, which is on the northern edge of the Aegean Sea, just maybe like 100 miles or 60, 70, 80 miles north of Mount Olympus, modern-day Greece. But it was the edges of Greece, right? So it's kind of like the edge of barbarian territory, although the Greeks did create settlements all over. They created a settlement as far west as the Iberian Peninsula, as far west as Spain. They made one in Sicily. They made one in North Africa. They made a bunch lining the edges of the Black Sea, northern Black Sea, Crimea, and all around there. Greeks made Greek settlements. But at any rate, Macedonia was kind of like the northern edge of Greece, so they were kind of like the barbarian-ish type people. But nevertheless, they were still Greeks, and that's when King Philip, he had a son called Alexander the Great, and he was like some special guy. He was like a crazy guy. Everybody was afraid of some horse, and he was smart. He noticed that the horse wasn't a crazy horse. It was just had his eyes in the sun. So he turned the horse in the other direction, so its eyes were in the sun, jumped on it, and rode off. And everybody's like, oh my God. Philip was like, oh my God, this is a special one. Macedon isn't a big enough kingdom for you, Alexander. You need to take over the world. He's like, really? Okay. And his mom was a medicine woman. So he had both of his parents were super powerful and gave him big ego, and he was really macho, flamboyant guy. Some people thought maybe he was gay, but whatever. He was a good warrior. His father was murdered on his wedding night to another queen. And some people think maybe it was actually Alexander the Great's mother paid some crazy bodyguard turned rogue to kill him, stab him, because she was afraid she wanted her son to be king. I don't know if that was true or not. Anyways, Alexander proclaimed king, in which point he went nuts and just attacked everybody. Took over Greece. Everybody wanted to follow him. And I think he was, a lot of these greats, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, these people, Ramses, these people were greats because they were really smart. They were good military tacticians, and Alexander the Great was a good military tactician. I think he was the one who invented pike warfare. And that's when you get a whole bunch of guys packed really close to each other, 3 feet apart, with 20-foot-long spikes. And so you come up against the army, and they can't reach you. They're hacking at your freaking pole. And then you run into them and you freaking stab them and run them down. It's like a tank. And, you know, they're close, so if they shoot you with the arrow, you just huddle together, put your armor up, and boom, you deflect it. And he organized that to a T. And then, you know, after he took over Greece, he got a whole bunch of Greeks to come follow him in this giant army. I don't know exactly how many, but they figured it was their turn to invade the Assyrian empire of 350 BC, whoever was in control then. Probably because, you know, they remembered getting invaded by them 200 years beforehand. Their turn to invade them. They thought their civilization was better. They wanted to spread it. The whole idea of Greek religion and Greek everything, Greek culture. And so they went in, kicked their ass. Their big leader was defeated and ran away, and then he eventually got killed by his own men. So Alexander wanted to kill him himself, and he thought it wasn't unfair that some lowly soldier bodyguard killed him, so he killed the bodyguards. And then, anyway, he went over to Persepolis, which was the capital of the Persian Empire, which is in modern-day southern Turkey, and he burnt it to the ground. And it was like the greatest palace ever. It had these huge pillars. It had these huge frescoes, giant, you know, technology, running water, everything. He burnt it to a crisp, man. He destroyed their civilization. But then he installed his own civilization, known as, I think, as the Achaemenid Empire. Greek people, you know. I don't think that was genocide, though. I think they just kind of took over their land, took over the politics, and let the people be. You know, the ruling aristocracy spoke Greek and were Greeks by blood, and the ruling family was Greek. It helps that way when you look different. I think they did look different, you know. I think the people of Persia were, you know, brown people. Just how they look today, and the people of Greece were white people. So you could tell the difference. Kind of made it easier to have a ruling family and a subjugates. Keeps it stratified that way, for better or for worse. Anyways, he fought his way all the way to about around the Indus Valley area, modern-day Pakistan, maybe even into modern-day India. He saw India, and he was like, whoa, these people, I thought freaking, you know, we were advanced. These people are way advanced. The Indians had their own religion. See, this was 350 BC. The Indians had Hinduism all the way since 1500 BC. So for 1200 years, they already had a very developed religion where they believed in stuff that is accurate, reincarnation, although the Greeks believed in reincarnation back then. You know, the Greeks, you know, they had the story of Sophocles, one of the four great playwrights who lived at the same time as Socrates and Pericles and just after the time of Pythagoras. But anyways, he and those other playwrights, and well, Sophocles in particular case of Oedipus Rex, wrote Oedipus, and you know, and he said that when Oedipus died, he became a dog. He was reincarnated as a dog, and they had like philosophical ideas where, you know, if you're if you're a bad person, you're reincarnated as a bad person, and they believed in reincarnation. But anyways, the Hindus did just believe in reincarnation. They had like 30 million gods. They had like the Bhagavad Gita the Mahabharata was already written by them. I think it was written just a couple hundred years before that, over maybe a 500-year period from like 1600 BC to 1300 BC or something. So it had already been around for like 1,000 years, I think, which is huge, the Mahabharata. You know, if you were to read the Mahabharata at the rate that I'm talking, it would take me 236 hours to finish it. Which has the Bhagavad Gita which in there. And the Bhagavad Gita, by the way, is the battle of the Atlantean gods. It's the wars of Atlantis. That 9,000 years BC. The wars that Plato was talking about, that he heard from his father Critias, who his father Critias talked about because he was studying in Egypt. And, you know, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about war gods. They talk about, I've read the Mahabharata. Well, I didn't read it. I listened to it in entirety. And most of it is battles. Space battles. Spaceships, nuclear wars, missiles. Everything, dude, you name it. I'm going to reference all of that so I can prove it. But because I have the entire Mahabharata on my website, as well as the audio version, although not the audio version now because I don't have the gigabytes on my server yet. But, I mean, they had like silks. They had palaces. It because they're very peaceful people, the Indians. So they had a very big, they were spending their energy making a civilization and not warring. So when he got there, he was like, whoa, I think I will end my conquest here. They can keep their society. You know, I think I took over enough. These guys are cool. I like them. I respect them. Also, I think he got his ass kicked a little bit because they were fighting elephants, and elephants aren't the greatest war vehicles, but they are good at dispersing pikemen, you know? I mean, you could kill elephants with pikemen, but when you got a whole bunch of like warriors packed in together, and elephants come running everywhere, you're gonna disperse, especially when these elephants are armed with shields. You know, you stick the shield, and it's kind of harder to kill an elephant that way. But elephants aren't great war animals like maybe some people might believe, you know? They're not like horses. They're not like, giddy up, let's go and attack these guys. No. The way that elephant warfare works is you dress your elephant up in freaking plates of armor. And you bring your elephant into this field of battle. The elephant's like, cool, we going for a walk? Next thing the elephant knows is there's freaking noise everywhere. There's people dying, screaming, and then he gets poked by something. He feels pain. The elephants freak out. They're like, what the fuck's going on? They run for their lives. Let's get out of here. That's when the elephant becomes a good war vehicle, because he's running into the enemy and dispersing the enemy. But then he becomes just as much of a liability as a war weapon, and he's just like, he just causes mayhem. Those elephants aren't like, let's kick ass. Those elephants are like, let's get the fuck out of here. This is scaring the shit out of me. I don't like this. But another way that elephants worked well as a war is because they scared horses. Horses don't like the smell of elephants, and they're afraid of elephants because they're bigger than them. And so the cavalry people started to lose control over their horses when they see these elephants. So that's kind of why they use elephants. But elephants aren't like horses. They're not like, let's kick ass. I'm going to poke that guy now. I'm going to crush him now. They're like, let's get out of here. But anyways, he turned around and he went back. Only Alexander was a fucking badass. Like, he was crazy. He didn't care about dying. He wanted to die young. He was kind of like Achilles. Remember Achilles from the Trojan War? Trojan War happened 1195 to 1185 BC. I guess I skipped the Trojan War. So maybe let's rewind to the Trojan War a little bit. Trojan War was a contemporary of, you know, he was in between Moses and David. He was a couple hundred years after Moses and Akhenaten, maybe around the time of Ramses, I'm not so sure, but, you know, kind of like mythological ages. It's called the Fabulous Age because they didn't have written. There weren't, you know, the kings and stuff weren't literate. So everything, you know, Homer lived from 900 to 850 BC. Homer was illiterate. Homer was just told his stories and then people wrote them down. Some people think he was even blind. But so, you know, that was the Fabulous Age. People just heard what they heard, and it's kind of like telephone, you know. You know, you never get telephone right, so it's like, well, what? You know, we know what happened, we don't know when, we don't know the order or whatever, but you know, people have good memories too. So sometimes telephone works perfectly, you know, but anyways, the Mycenaeans, if we're going to reverse, sorry, because I missed a lot. Don't worry though, I'll go back to Alexander the Great. But yeah, the Mycenaean, first as far as Greek civilization goes, it started with the Cretans in Crete, the Minoans, who some people think that was Atlantis, because Manoa did have an explosion when I think an island on Crete exploded. But we all know that the island of Santorini exploded big time, and that's where there actually was a society, and it blew up, killed everybody. And one Jewish historian thinks that that when Moses was running away from the Pharaoh, and God parted the waves, that was actually that's when the explosion over on Santorini happened. Because the explosion on Santorini did happen about that time, which parted the waves, they ran across, and then the waves came back and killed all the Egyptians. That's a little bit fanciful thinking. But anyways, yeah, but the Moans had an advanced civilization. They had mosaics, frescoes, running water, all that stuff. And then and that was maybe 2000 BC or whatever, I don't remember. But then the Mycenaeans took over. Mycenae is an interesting place. They were about 1300 BC, about the same time as Akhenaten, about the same time as Moses. They were pretty much founded by some guy, I don't remember who, but maybe Mycenaeus, I think. That's a beautiful place because I went there last summer. It's right next to Argos. It's within sight of Argos. We're from Jason and the Argonauts, who have a really beautiful, I think, Byzantine area castle up on the top. But, you know, Argos, Jason the Argonauts, he went around and he took over, he conquered or whatever. I don't remember his story exactly, but the Golden Fleece, looking for the Golden Fleece. But anyways, then the Mycenaeans started about 1300 BC. They made this big castle, this big place, way up on the side of, kind of on the side of a mountain up on this like pinnacle area, you know, fortified area. And they have those like lion gates and these big huge stones. But they do have the treasure of Atreus, which is, I guess, where they kept the treasure. Now, the legend goes is that the giant, the Cyclops, helped build the Mycenos because the stones are really big. Even on Mycenos, the stones are really big. But especially the treasure of Atreus. The stones lining the pathway to get into treasure of Atreus are bigger than my car, and they're all stacked together perfectly. It's pretty much almost as impressive as Sacsayhuaman in Peru, in Cusco. But on the doorway, the big stone that goes on the top of the doorway, and then the treasure of Atreus is actually this big cone, this big round arc that's covered in with dirt, so you could walk around on top of it, and it's just dirt, and it's kind of inside of, it's a cave inside of a mountainside. But the stone on top, the doorway, is bigger than my car. It's like 15 feet long by like 4 feet high by like 8 feet wide. I mean, it's like, I think the lady said 260 tons, but it looked bigger than that. It looked like 500, 600 tons. Way too big for anybody to build. The gods helped, the aliens helped build that shit. Or the giants. But when I say giants, I mean people who are big, like 20-foot motherfuckers. So, you know, maybe there were half alien, half humans running around who are 20 feet tall, who made, when there were huge trees back then, redwoods that they built freaking hydraulic devices off of, and they placed the stones that way, or they just straight up used alien technology, how they built the pyramids with the laser, the wand, the levitation wands, which you can see in the hieroglyphics. But anyways, treasure of Atreus will blow your mind. But anyways, the Mycenaeans lived, and then the Trojans, who were actually the Trojans, you know, when Troy was defeated back in 1185 BC, the survivors of Troy went to Rome and founded Rome, but the other survivors of Troy went up and founded the Russians, founded Kievan Rus. Anyways, Mycenaeans lived for a long time, and then the Trojans came and they did some trade deal or something, because they were Greek, you know, they could speak the same language or whatever. They came and did a deal with Agamemnon. Only problem is, you know, Paris came home with Agamemnon's brother's, what was his name? Wife, Helen of Troy, who was like the hottest girl in the world. So they went over, attacked Troy, besieged them until well, we all know that story, but they brought the Trojan horse in with the people hiding in it, including Achilles, and took over Troy, burned it to the ground, destroyed it. And then that's actually the the Iliad. That's the story of one of the generals of Troy in his quest to find a new homeland for like 100 years or something, and his descendants wandering around. Well, I mean, if it's 1185, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus in 760 BC, so that's like 400 years where they wandered around. But the Iliad is just this one guy wandering around. But anyways, they went and they were the ones who started Rome, Romulus and Remus in 760 BC. But that's basically a backstepping to Greece. But back to Alexander the Great, he got there and he decided to turn around and come back. But Alexander the Great was a badass warrior. This is how I got sidetracked. He probably wasn't afraid to die young. He wanted to be a warrior and fight. See, that's how like Iron Age, or probably especially Neolithic Age battles happen, is that your leader was the guy who was the best fighter. He was the one, you know, like David. That's how King David became king, because he was the best fighter. He was the one who killed Goliath, so then he became king, you know. So that's how it always was. You know, the more barbaric you get, that's how it is. I mean, that's how the Celts were. That's why they lost other battles, because they kept losing leaders and stuff, because they kept getting killed, and they'd want to have these one-on-one fights, and then the Romans were like, yeah, right, we've seen that before. Let's just kill you with strategy. Anyways, we'll get to that later. So Alexander the Great was a really freaking badass fighter. I mean, there's one story where because he brought historians with him to document his conquests. Alexander the Great, he went and he had a battle where he was fighting these. I guess maybe it was Greeks or maybe it was the Persians, but he's fighting these guys. You know, he kills this guy, he kills the other guy. Some other huge guy runs up and is about to chop Alexander's head off, and so his friend like chopped the guy's arm off right before he was going to kill Alexander, and you know, just in the thick of it. Anyways, they were sieging one town, somewhere in Afghanistan. I don't remember where, but they're sieging a town, right? Alexander's leading the charge. He climbs up a ladder, jumps inside the other side of the walls of its town, in with all the other warriors. When he jumps over the ladder, he kicks the ladder too hard or something. The ladder falls over. So he's the only guy in there, and none of his colleagues could come and join him. So he's fighting in there all by himself. They finally put the ladder up and climb in and jump in and fight with him, and they take over, and Alexander doesn't die. Only problem is, he was the only guy fighting. Everybody was trying to fight him, so somebody got a shot off, and they shot him with their arrow. And so his guys grabbed him and carried him out, and he was done for the day. Only problem was, the arrow went into his lungs, and it got infected, and he died from it at the age of 32. And when they said, you know, well, who's going to be your successor, even though he had brothers and stuff, he goes, to the strongest, in perfect Alexander the Great fashion. Anyways, his brother took over. He wasn't the strongest. I guess he wasn't a good leader, but anyways, that's when they started the Achaemenid Empire. You know, that was one of his generals. That's when they started all these, you know, Greek-based empires all over the place, and Greek culture grew. Greek gods grew. You know, see, and it got in the Bactrians, I think, empire, and like modern day Portugal. Now, one story, one testament to the success of the Indian civilization, why they have so much culture, such good food, so many different developed political, philosophical ideas, and you know, clothing and everything, is because they just accepted anything. You know, it's probably a genetic thing, I believe. But they were just like, oh, cool, something new. So, you know, they accepted the Roman religion. Oh, cool, more gods, bring them in. We'll do that. You know, we'll put up. I don't mind seeing a whole statue of Zeus up there or whatever. So, anyways, but one of the kingdoms that they started was they took over Greece. I mean Egypt. And that was called the Ptolemaic dynasty. Now, if you look at Egypt, let's get sidetracked in Egypt a little bit. If you look at Egypt as a civilization, people have the tendency to think it was like one civilization. It was like one group of people who made like all the pyramids and everything. I don't see it that way. I see it as Egypt was the cream of the crop place where everybody wanted to live because it had the Nile River, which flooded every year very predictably. It could house lots of people. So whoever was the smartest, best warrior were the ones who were in control of that area, and they were always getting invaded because everybody wanted it. But it was also easiest for them to have an empire because they were the richest and they could control. And so basically the capital was somewhere along the Nile. Plus, a long time ago, at least 2,500 BC, maybe even before that, you know, maybe even 9,000 BC, that's when those portal holes point to the center of their god, the Orion Nebula, was in 9,000 BC. But anyways, that was another reason they wanted to be there, is because that's where these freaking monuments were. That's where the gods were. This is the center of the world because the freaking pyramid is right there. We want to be housed right at the bottom of that, as well as this huge Sphinx, the largest, you know, monolith in the world. You know, that's where they are. So it's kind of like, you know, these guys, you know, the next dynasty got in control of the other dynasties, got control of the other dynasty. But whenever they take over, they would accept the culture because they thought it was the culture of the gods, and so they would keep it going. But anyways, the Greeks came, and that was kind of like a change in blood, you know, whoever's in control, and also in language because they spoke Greek. But their capital was in Alexandria, which is on the northern edge of the you know, Greek coastline, right just to the west of the mouth of the Nile. And at that time, the center of Alexandria was a beautiful place, actually, because right now it's this giant bay, but before, in those days, it was connected by this big like sandy causeway, and the center was right in the middle of it. So on either side they had beachfront property. On the other side it was just this lake, so it was really calm water all the time. On the other side it was the ocean where they could go off and go wherever they wanted and do trade and stuff, become rich. So anyways, one of those Ptolemies, they're all called Ptolemy. For 350 years, that was 350, well, he died in 329 BC, so for like 330 years until, well, say 300 years, right? Until the time of Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemies, great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Alexander the Great, the Greek, is how long the Ptolemies, but one of those lasted and were controlled northern Egypt. But one of those Ptolemies was the guy who started the, I don't know which one, but he was the one who started the Alexandrian Library. I think it was only like 100 years after Alexander, but they were really, they were really into collecting culture and stuff, and they could speak Greek. So they went on and they would buy up all of the books, and they'd even do it clandestinely, cheating. You know, they'd be like, bring me the book, I'll pay for it. And then or can I borrow it? And then they wouldn't give it back, steal it. So they had the Alexandrian Library, and so they were really smart, and it was kind of like the Harvard, the Oxford of the day back then, and that's why they had lots of really famous philosophers and scientists. For example, Hypatia lived there. They had a movie starring Rachel Weisz called Hypatia, which is really good, which is about the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. So, but anyways, yeah, they that was like a great center back then, and it was an independent country until they got taken over by the Romans. So I guess I'll start talking about the Romans. The Romans culture, the Roman civilization started, well, actually, let's not, okay, well, yeah. The Roman civilization started about 760 BC. Or was it 706? I think it was 706 was when the Olympian Games started. So I think it was 760 when the Romans started. I don't know. I don't think the Romans took part in the Olympics, but a little bit too far away, other side of the Adriatic. But they started Rome. It was Romulus and Remus. They found some kind of area, and they were like, I guess they were orphans, and this legend goes they were rescued by a wolf who like suckled them, and they were okay to survive after that. And then somebody raised them, and they were babies, and they started this like new kingdom at the base of these 7 hills, right next to the Tigris River or the Danube, whatever river that is. Only Romulus killed Remus because they're savages back then. Only one guy could be top dog. Happens over and over again in history, and so they named the town called Rome after him. Now Rome was a very big success because Rome had a different idea, for example, than the Spartans, who was kind of like the other end of the extreme, in that they would take anybody. They were like, yeah, we're starting this new city. We want to take anybody. If you're an outcast, if you got ostracized from the Athenians, or you got your ass kicked by the freaking Spartans, and they kicked you out because you're deformed or whatever, come. They weren't as xenophobic or as exclusionary as the Greeks. They just took everything, and because they were going to do what it takes to make as powerful of a freaking city-state as they possibly could. Now, let me do a little bit of a side step here, a little bit of a diversion in that, remember what I was talking about before as the people of today are the descendants of the people of the past. I think that's a really interesting way to look at history. The people of the Germans are today, they didn't just pop out of nowhere. That's why it's important to study history, and I'll make a video about why it's important to study history. But I'm talking about history now. We are the way we are because of stuff that happened in the past. And that's people are different because of stuff that had happened in the past. So, for example, the Italians of today, they're Romans, right? Now, what constitutes an Italian? Well, Italians that's where the mafia came from. So the mafia existing in America, coming from Italy, and the Roman Empire coming from Italy are not isolated events. They're related. Now, Romans and Italians in general, I think, are good at accomplishing something by creating their own rules. They'll break rules. They'll do what it takes, right? Mafia will do what it takes to make money. They don't care if it's right or wrong. They don't care. if they freaking kill their own family to get there. They don't care. They'll do what it takes to win. That's what that's how the Romans got so popular. That's how the Italians won the World Cup in '98. They were freaking punching the French, you know, when the freaking the refs weren't looking and stuff. You know, they'll do what it takes, and so that's how the Romans got so popular. They did what it takes to become popular. They were like, they got all the best forms of warfare from all over. They took the pike warriors from Macedonia. They utilized the pike when it was necessary, you know, in the big open field, and they do the pike. But they liked they called it gladius hispanus, Spanish sword. That small 22-foot long sword that they used to do the infantry battles, because it was good to use a short sword because you could move it around quick and you could poke the guy, and all you had to do was poke the guy once, and then he was injured, and you just leave him, and then you poke the other guy, and then you know, you leave a whole battlefield filled with like wounded warriors, and then you can't really do anything with them, so then they just become dead warriors. Where before, somebody got wounded and it was like, I'm still a warrior or whatever, you know, they didn't think ahead. And then they took like cavalry. They were good at cavalry that they took from the Persians, and you know, catapults from the Persians probably, and even, you know, they hijacked, if you want to call it that. They incorporated the religion of the Greeks. They just changed the names of all the gods. They turned Hera into they turned Athena into Hera. They turned Jupiter into Zeus. They turned Apollo into or whatever. I can't remember all of the gods, but you know, they incorporated their religion, their rites, their rituals, everything. You know, except for their language and the alphabet they invented themselves. Although I'm sure they took a lot of the other stuff from them. Yeah, they took the boats from the Carthaginians. They found a washed-up Carthaginian boat, and they used that boat against the Carthaginians. Before that, they couldn't fight the Carthaginians in sea battles because the Carthaginians were the bosses of the sea. Carthage would start at about 1000 BC or something. Carthage was an interesting place. Carthage was started by a woman, actually, called Dido. She was, I think, originally Syrian, and she got like deposed and kicked out, and so she brought her like royal family or whatever entourage with her. And they found a cool place on the northern edges peninsula of modern-day Tunis. They were smart. They wanted that because they saw a lot of these big like limestone blocks, which they could build a city out of. The way that she took that was she got that land is all the natives of there, I guess, weren't as cunning. They were like, she made a bet. She was like, yeah, if I give you, you know, this sword and that sword or whatever, then give me a amount of land that I could, I don't know, cover with like a bull hide. And they were like, what? Oh, okay, you can do much. What are you going to do? Cover bull hide, and that's like a tent. So she just cut it really, 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 really thin. And she had it move all the way around this huge area. Boom, and that's me. And they're like, oh shit. And she got the best area. So then the area that they chose, which was an area that they could quarry limestone. Back then, they couldn't really make big monoliths very easily because they didn't know how to make, you know, because you had to have really big stones that you could cut perfectly in order to make something that was formidable, like a wall that you could defend and store money behind and make a big civilization out of. You know, I mean, if the other guy over there has a better army than you this one day or sneaks up on you, they could totally take you over because you don't have walls. Your walls are like sticks, you know? And because they didn't really have, the cement of the day back then wasn't really that good. The cement of the day was just like a mixture of something that as soon as it rained the next time, it would just dissolve it. And then you have to like patch. It was like kind of like Adobe cement, you know? So the only way that they really knew how to make big fortifications is if they made out of these big blocks that they would just place on top of each other. And so the Carthaginians did well because they were right next to this really big area where they could quarry all of that, those big blocks, those limestone blocks, and make these huge apartment buildings, 6 stories high. Carthage was like a freaking metropolis back then, and so then they had the greatest fleet, and so they owned the whole southern half of Spain. They had the whole northern tip of freaking Africa, all the way up until, you know, where the Egyptians had their territory. They were the enemy of Rome as Rome was growing, but then Rome found that warship, and they learned how to make the Carthaginian warship, and they ended up having the Punic Wars, which were from like 100 and... See, Rome was started in 706, and it was a kingdom, and then it became a republic around the year 550, which was actually helped Rome a lot because they could, you know, the smart guys could always... It was a meritocracy, so then smart people were in control. and you know, they could delegate certain things to the smartest people to do this and that, and they worked well as a unit. So they were getting stronger. But Rome really started to take over the whole area and become powerful around 150 BC. That's when the Punic Wars happened. There was 3 Punic Wars. I think the first one was like 176 to 174 BC. They won. They took Spain from Carthage, and then they had another one from like 140, and then another one from like 146 to 140 was the last one. Now the first one, there was this guy called, I think it was Hannibal, or Hannibar, and he fought he went off to fight the Romans, but he had a little 9-year-old son who was Hannibal, and Hannibal was like, "Oh, Daddy, I want to come and join you in the campaign." He's like, "No, you're too young." He's like, "Oh, come on, Daddy." He's like, "All right, you can come join me in the campaign if you promise me that you will be the eternal enemy of Rome." He's like, "All right, sure." So he came on with him. The campaign saw him. Daddy became hero, and so he became the eternal enemy of Rome. They fought Rome. Now Hannibal came within a hair's breadth of actually taking over Rome and destroying Rome, sacking Rome. He brought like 300 elephants or something across Spain, over the Alps, over the Pyrenees, over the Alps, over cragginess. And the way that they even made it, he lost most of his elephants. But the way that he made it was that he made these big bonfires that he would like throw the embers on top of stones and then pour water on it, the same way that the Chinese made the canal way back when or whatever. And then he actually made his own roads that the elephants could climb over. Made it into Greece, Italy. And then he was like ravaging the countryside of Italy for 13 years. And he had one battle early on with the Romans, and he kicked the Romans' asses. He destroyed the Romans. He could have marched on Rome, but he didn't. He was stupid. If he marched on Rome, he could have taken Rome, but he didn't. But the Romans thought he was going to march on Rome at any point. But he won that battle. He was a really good military victor. He won that battle because it was at night, and he got a whole bunch of like cows, and he tied candles on the cows' horns. So then the Romans went and they saw these like cows moving around, you know, the candles moving and stuff, and he's like, "Oh, those are the battles. We're gonna attack them there." So the Romans went and they went after him, and then they're like, "Wait, it's just cows." And then that's when Hannibal came and surprised them and killed them all. And it was like one of the 3 big defeats of the Romans. One of the 4 big defeats of the Romans. The 4 big defeats of the Romans in battle that I can think of is the Battle of Kharsus in like 45 BC, where the Persians or the Assyrians kicked the Romans' asses in a really botched, stupid battle that the Romans were led. I'll talk about that later, by this guy who was doing it just because he wanted to get glory. And then Augustus, when the Romans went into Germany, and the Germans decimated 3 legions, and then when the Romans were defeated by the Goths in like the year 370, 380 AD, which eventually led to their destruction by the Goths. But anyways, and then of course Hannibal, the first one. But anyways, Hannibal's fighting, and then Hannibal finally lost a battle. For 13 years he was there. Finally lost a battle. And then they had another, and then so they had to pay Rome all this tribute. So Carthage at that point was basically just a freaking tiny little village after that, a little kingdom. But then they had another war. They didn't like, they like violated the treaty or something by trying to take over Spain or something like that, something stupid. So then Rome was like, "All right, fuck you guys then." And they went over and they sacked and destroyed Carthage. They like knocked down the buildings and they freaking burnt the whole field down. They made it so nobody could live there again, and they killed everybody, and maybe even genocide. I mean, they put an end to Carthage. Even though it took them 9 days to siege. I mean, everybody fought. They should make a movie about it. Carthage fought for their life. The old people got back and re-enlisted. Young people were fighting. Women were fighting, but they ended up losing. Anyways, Rome. So anyways, yeah. So it was about the year 146. 146 was actually the year that Rome actually took over, or 141, 146 BC is when Rome took over Greece. All of Greece. I think they finally took over Greece at the end of Greece when they killed, I think it was Philip, another Philip of Macedon, maybe even one of the descendants of Alexander the Great, who was legendary for the pike warfare. But you know, the Romans did pike too, and they were better fighters, more dynamic. They fought the pike guys in the wrong place, not in the place you want to do pike, on the side of a really steep hill with the pikes guys on the bottom, Roman guys on top. then they outflanked him with the horses and cut down the pike guys, killed the Greeks, and took over Greece. Now, one interesting thing is that the Greeks wanted that. The Greeks wanted to be taken over by the Romans because this guy, Philip, was a tyrant. He was a bad guy. He was charging too many taxes and killing people. And so the Greeks thought of that as a liberation. See, now that's a good point. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, empires are bad. The Roman Empire was bad. Maybe empires are good, you know, in some ways. They'll actually liberate you from a tyrant. That's how when Rome took over Jerusalem, the Jews wanted to be taken over at that point as well. I think that was about around the same time. It was the Hasmonean kingdom, I think, was a bad kingdom. They didn't like it. They wanted to be taken over by the Romans. They got taken over. They're happy, and they became Romans after that, you know. So it's not all about Rome being the bad guy, although they were bad. I mean, well, I guess I'll talk about that later when they took over the Dacians. But, yeah, so Rome was starting to get control. Now, let's go over to... let's start talking, since we're still in BC, let's talk a little bit about the Americas. Because the Americas were having some civilizations back then, you know, the BC area. The Mayans, I haven't really gotten around to studying the Mayans that much, but the Mayans and were around BC area time, maybe 1,000, up to 1,000 BC. They had a whole bunch of city-states that lasted until maybe 1,000 AD. So maybe I'll talk about that later. But they were it was like city-states, only in the jungle. Separated, they communicate each other, they take each other over, this kind of a thing. But as far as Asia goes, you know, the Buddha, which I know the least amount, but the Buddha was a contemporary, you know, about 530 AD to 460 BC or something like that. He lived until he was 80. He was an exact contemporary to Pythagoras and to Lao Tzu and Confucius, by the way. They all lived at the same time, which kind of makes you think, you know, why did all these people live at the same time when they're all separated by so much and not communicating? Well, maybe they were communicating, they were doing trade, but also a lot of people, and I believe, say that, you know, astrology, it was written in the stars, the sunbeams, planets aligned in a certain way, shooting all the creative energy of religion to us and making us think about that at that time. You know, so, yeah, so that was about 500 BC is when Confucius, and he was kind of like modern day religion. It was different. It was kind of more like a set of rules for society rules. But he had lots of good ones, you know, lots of, like, basically ways to keep the aristocracy from following rule of law, kind of like a republic, not abusing their rights to the poor people. And so he, you know, that's why they get all these Confucius say, and, you know, they memorize those. One of them, Confucius say, bad tyrant, bad government, worse than man-eating tiger. And that actually comes from a real-life Confucianism saying. He came across and he saw some woman whose, like, son and husband had been eaten by a tiger. And he's like, well, why don't you move if there's a tiger here? And she goes, oh, but if I go into that kingdom, he's very bad. I'd rather live here. And he's like, and he goes to his disciple, this is true. Bad kingdom worse than man-eating tiger. But anyways, Confucius, he wanted to be like a hero, you know, or he wanted to be like, his big goal in life was to be a tutor of, like, the greatest king ever, and, like, train some kid to be like the greatest king ever and justest king ever. So he kept going from, like, kingdom to kingdom, fiefdom to fiefdom, like being like, hey, I'm your guy, listen to me. But he was too arrogant and he was too bossy, and so then they'd piss him off and kick him off. But they would remember some of the stuff he said and they had respect for him. Confucius was the son of a warlord. He was really, I guess, a giant warlord who never lost a battle. And so his son, by, like, he was like 70 when his son was born by, like, some really young woman, you know, but Confucius was supposed to be 9 feet tall. He was like the biggest man who ever existed, who ever lived. I guess they're thinking, no, he was really like 6 feet tall, which is like 9 feet tall back then. But he was like really ugly. He had like a really big head, and he had a square head. He had a flat head. So his head came out, and then it did a 90-degree turn, and then came down like this. So he looked like Frankenstein, and these like 2 horns here, and he was like really ugly and really tall, but he was like really smart and really arrogant. And go around. But anyways, he died. His real son was like a nitwit, didn't want to, and then he died and didn't want to freaking learn anything. So he's pissed off at his son. But then he had a disciple who was really smart, but his disciple died of like plague or something, which depressed Confucius. But anyways, yeah, that's when the Taoism and the Confucianism started at the same time. And then a couple hundred years later, they had all these different kingdoms. One thing I want to like incorporate in my website is how big a kingdom usually is. I think kingdoms are usually about the same size. It's about how big you can, ride your horse in a couple days, to go collect your taxes. Now, one thing I kind of noticed also, and I guess this is in the side, maybe I'll do it in another video, so I'll say it really quickly, but as I've been studying history, I have noticed that kingdoms and stuff are kind of like businesses, like today you would have, kingdoms. The king dies and he gives the kingdom to his son. The king of the boss of the business dies, he hands it over to his son, right? Kingdoms become empires. Big businesses turn into multinational corporations. Businesses get sold to other owners. Kingdoms get taken over by other dynasties, but it's the same dynasty, right? Same business plan, same kingdom, same business plan, same religion, same people, different family, right? Same thing, same business, different ownership. Businesses get taken over by other businesses because their battle plan, their business plan is out of date or whatever. So then the business gets bought by another business. Kingdoms get taken over by other kingdoms, but the kingdom remains a kingdom. They just controlled by another king from the other kingdom, a vassal kingdom, right? So then you have like vassal businesses, like Vons was taken over by Safeway, but it's still called Bonds, right? Or then businesses get completely taken over and go out of business. Kingdoms get taken over and go out of business. And it's kind of like the business plan. So it's like empires. The Romans spread their empire because they're like, we have the best culture. We have the idea of, we share everything. We know this, we know that. We're going to go in. We're going to tell you how it's done. We're going to build a giant amphitheater there. Because the Romans, they built amphitheaters all over their empire. There's a giant ancient amphitheater in England, all over the empire. Syria, Romania, Greece. The Romans, man, they're like, yeah, this is how we're going to do it. You get a big palace. We're going to do the mosaic. Oh, cool. We don't do mosaic. Yeah, this is how you do mosaic. This is how you make this war. This is how you do formation, battle formation. This is how you build an amphitheater. You go to the amphitheater. There's the plays. You recreate the plays. Because they recreated plays. Oedipus Rex was recreated a bunch of times. Romeo and Juliet was a redoing of, what was it? An ancient Greek play. Roads. We're going to show you how to build a road. You can build a road from here to here. Oh, roads, yeah, because you can move, you can trade better like that. Aqueducts. They build aqueducts all over the empire. They have a huge aqueduct that still exists. It's in Israel. Aqueducts and, the Byzantines made aqueducts like the Romans never built. And all over Romania and stuff. You can still see Roman ruins all over Romania and stuff. So it's kind of like spread our business plan, and I like that. It's a good thing, Empires are good. Multinational corporations are good. Franchises are good. I'll give you an example. I would rather eat at a Subway than some like restaurant that I've never been to that's owned. For example, I went and got a restaurant. I got in the Subway today. I got a sandwich. It wasn't a franchise. It wasn't a Subway. I paid $9. Way more expensive than I would have paid for a Subway. And the sandwich sucked. And it was just as much food as like a foot-long Subway, right? Business plans. So that's basically one way that, empires could work. Right. They don't work in some situations. They do work in other situations. But anyways, that's Rome basically in a nutshell. I guess we'll do another video about it. But anyways, so they had all these different kingdoms in China. And it was kind of like Greece. They kind of spoke the same language, looked the same. China, that kind of part of China around where Beijing is a good place. A lot of people can support a lot of people. It's really flat. It's just south of really big mountains, so there's lots of big rivers that go through there, arable land, next to the ocean, a lot of food, a good place to make a society, right? Only there are lots of kingdoms. Until there was this one guy, there was this one kingdom called the Jin, back in like 260. It was called the Warring States period, because for a long time, maybe like 100 years, they kept fighting each other. All these different kingdoms fighting each other, feudalism. Until they got sick of it, and they were like, what do we keep fighting each other for? We want to have peace. So then one guy was like, one kingdom, it was this guy, Shi Huangdi. He was going to be the king, but his mother remarried, and he found out that his mother wanted her kids from the remarriage to be the king. So he had his stepfather and his stepbrothers murdered, and then he had his mother banished. And he was a really good military commander. He went over and took over. I don't know how he did it, what his strategy was, military strategy. But he took over all the surrounding kingdoms one by one. until the final one, I think it was like Zhu or whatever, Zhu just gave up. They're like, oh, we've heard of you. Okay, we're going to give up. And he took over them. And then it was China, unified China in the year 221 BC. Only problem was, this guy was interesting. We should make a movie about him. Only problem was, he wanted to live forever, right? He was a king since he was like 10. You know, he had unified China at the age of like 22 or something. But he wanted to live a long time. And he had some grandiose ideas. I don't know if he was the one of those guys, I don't know exactly who it was, but one of those guys made a canal through a mountain in order to aerify this big valley. He straight up drilled through a mountain by making big bonfires, then pouring water on the water cracks, and they hauled it away. But Shi Huangdi was the guy who made the first Great Wall of China. I don't know how big or which one it was, because another guy, a few hundred years later, I don't know exactly when, actually connected them, and that's when the Great Wall of China was made. But he was the one who made the first big one, and he made it very well, but he basically abused people. He taxed people too much. People went off, and they just died there. There's like 30 million people buried inside the Great Wall of China, because you go and they work you to death, and it's cold, and but they made it really well. They packed it with dirt, rocks, and they made it, so it still stands today. But anyways, he wanted to live forever, so he was like, "Ooh, how do I live forever?" And they thought that if you take mercury pills, you're going to live forever, because mercury was like the magical elixir of the day. Because mercury was the only element, the only metal that they knew of that could dissolve gold. And gold, since the beginning of time, especially in India, is a magical substance. It is the substance of the gods, because it's the most beautiful, it's the most malleable, you can make stuff out of it, it's the shiniest. And also, molecularly, it's the most balanced. Anyways, I mean, they go off on gold in the Mahabharata. They talk about gold over and over and over again, about how gold is the king of all this, of all that. And it was the only thing that could dissolve gold. So they thought it could make him live forever. Mercury is a very heavy metal. It's the stuff that's inside of thermometers. And so you remember when you're a kid, you're not supposed to break the thermometer, and you're supposed to handle the mercury in the thermometer with gloves on, because you cannot touch that stuff, because it's so heavy that the molecules will actually sink into every part of your body. They'll sink into your nerves, and they'll just lodge themselves into your nerves, where your brain sends its synaptic signals. So he was taking mercury pills, so the mercury got itself lodged in his mind and his brain and his nervous system, and so his brain wasn't working right. His brain was getting short-circuited, and he went nuts. He went completely insane. He thought that he was going to take over the world he thought that the main enemy of China was fish. So he had his entourage take him to the sea. And then he was going to kill all the fish by wading into the water and shoot his bow into the giant fish. So he shot his bow and he said, "I'm killing the fish. I'm going to take over the world by killing the fish." Because he blamed the fish for blocking his way to find the magic place where there's the elixir of eternality. And he was completely gone. And then on his way back, he died because his body deteriorated and was covered with mercury. So anyways, he was the one, he was like fabulously wealthy. He was the first. One interesting epoch of history is when empires are born. Because empires are born after states of feudalism, where there's all these wars, and so people understand more than anybody else the importance or the benefit of having one guy who's in charge of everybody. That way there's no civil war and you don't have to worry about it. And just listen to him, benevolent dictator, do whatever he says, but literally do whatever he says, So then his son is raised as a spoiled brat. You're God. Whatever you say goes. You are the child of God. You can do whatever you want. So then he's like, oh yeah, then he grows up, turns into a tyrant, and does some pretty freaking outlandish things, which I'll talk about later, some other guys do. But anyways, this guy Shi Huangdi was kind of like that, especially since he was going nuts. He became very paranoid because he had to kill all of his family to stay on top, and now he's poisoned with mercury, so he's just like, You know, nobody knew where he was. Nobody was allowed to know where he was because he's always thought he was going to get assassinated. So he used that power, and he made a giant. It's called the Giant Tomb or whatever. And they only discovered it like I think they discovered it in like 1974 or something recently. But it was this huge pyramid that was as big as the Great Pyramid, okay, which you can still see. It's just a big mound now. A big pyramid, as big as the Great Pyramid. Underneath, he had like 500 perfect replicas of his war. Because when he died, he was going to bring his army with him, kind of like the Egyptians. So they have all these statues who are 5'8" to 6'2" tall in perfect formation, perfect replicas. So we get to see these days in pictures of them what their weapons look like, what their, you know, even their eyes. They're like Chinese, you know, their hats, the gloves, everything, chariots, everything, and he loved his mercury. So the legend goes is that there was this giant sea of mercury that was in the middle of this area where all the guys were standing around. And they went in there and they did the tests, and yeah, there's 5 times as much mercury in the dirt underneath that tomb than what there normally is. And I don't think they've even gone into the mercury room yet. That's untouched, actually, I think. The Chinese are going to go in there because they don't feel like they have the technology to excavate it yet, so they're going to wait a few more years. But there's stories of booby traps and stuff, so they're going to be careful about that. But anyways, he took over China, but then 2 years after he died, they went back into Civil War era. But they had gotten used to the idea of unifying China, and they liked it. So then, you know, somebody else unified China, and I think it was the Han Dynasty who had him after that. And yeah, and different people controlled him at different times. So anyways, that's China. And, you know, Southeast Asia had people too. They had the Champa, the Hong. Southeast Asia has had you know, Renton culture and all that stuff back then too. I haven't really studied all that. The problem with China